Turn, if you would, please, this morning with me to James chapter 3. We're going to look at a few verses, actually verses 13 through 18 this morning of James chapter 3. How timely. It seems it's been working that way for the last few weeks. And I think what we can find here, right, is that, as you know, we've kind of been going across this, marching through James. We took a detoured moment for Christmas. And recognizing and celebrating that gift. It's with me. I'm telling you, if you ask me what my motto is for this year, it's going to be indeed what the angels told to the shepherds, right? Behold, I bring you good news, right? That's great joy for all people. And I think that as we go into this year and all the things that we see and experiencing, that if we could just keep the anthem of our heart to be, yes, this is all happening, but there is good news that brings great joy for all people. And let me tell you about him. And so we took that detour, right, of Christmas, but then we came back into James, and we find ourselves today in James 13 through 18 in chapter 3. And we're looking at a precious gift that we should desire each day to possess more and more. And that's the gift of wisdom. Wisdom is knowing how to do or respond to a circumstance. It's how to apply the tools. We can be very intelligent, but not be wise. We could be not that educated or intelligent and be very wise because we are able to stand back, look at a circumstance, make a decision, and then know when to speak, when to be silent, when to go, when to wait, right? We understand something that only God can give. I wrote this down for us to keep in mind in regards to wisdom. If you want to make sure you're making wise choices, or if you're acting right as a wise man, woman, boy, or girl, ask yourself these things before you make a decision or before you speak, right, or before you do something. Number one, what are my motives? Okay? Do I want to make a point, or do I just want to be seen? Okay? I just want to be heard, right? What are the motives? Okay, that's behind us. Is there bitterness or envy in our heart? Are we speaking from God's wisdom or from the wisdom of the world? That is happening so much all the time, but right now. We see the wisdom of the world more so than God's wisdom. An example, my rights matter more than anybody else. Okay. Yes, our rights matter. But there's also this thing called surrender. There's also this thing called sacrifice. There's also this concept of knowing the greater good. But that's the wisdom of the world. It's my way or the highway, right? Or, anytime we say I, okay? I, too much. There's that worldly wisdom thing kind of creeping up. Because it's all about me, myself, and I. And we know that doesn't go very well. And then next thing. Am I a peacemaker or a troublemaker? You might want to write these down, right? They'll be in the notes because this really kind of resonated with me. What are my motives? Is there bitterness in my heart or envy? Am I speaking God's wisdom or the world's wisdom? And am I being a peacemaker? Or am I just stirring things up? Am I just trying to get a reaction out of something? Okay? Remember this. If your heart is right before God, then your words will produce the kind of fruit that He's looking for. If our heart is right before God, it doesn't mean we're perfect. But it means we desire, right? We desire to represent Him. We depend upon him to be our sovereign, right, protection, if that's happening and our heart is right, where we are very aware of our faults, but we know that he sees beyond our faults and meets our needs mindset, we'll find ourselves then bearing the right kind of fruit that we're going to see here as we go through this message today. And don't forget this, James opened in his letter, remember who he's talking to. It's good for us to remember that, isn't it? He was talking to a people who were scattered, right? Separated from their homes, separated from their families, and separated from God, the temple, as they knew to see his presence. So these folks were not in a good place. We must remember that. They were not experiencing all the creature comforts that we even have in this day and time. They were in a bad place, in bad circumstances. And he said to them, in bad circumstances, if you need wisdom, just ask God. Because that's where it comes from. We don't get wisdom from reading a book. We can learn a lot from reading a book. We don't get wisdom from education. We should be educated, and there's much value to education. We don't get wisdom from rubbing elbows with our buddies and deciding what we think. And yes, we need to have friends and acquaintances and relationships, but wisdom comes from God. And James said to them in James 1:5, he says, if anyone lacks wisdom, ask God, and he will give it, listen, generously, without finding fault. You don't have to say, well, he's not going to help me because I've got these issues. He's not going to help me because I know I got all this baggage I'm dragging along. He's not going to help me because I've already messed this mess up. That's good news, okay? That's what the angels talked about to the shepherds. Good news. Good news. He's not holding our faults against us. Good news, he's not like you and I. He doesn't play the favoritism game, okay? That's good news, right? He doesn't operate the way we operate. That's good news. And that's what he's saying here. Without finding fault, it will be given to you. James 3:13, as we move into the message now. Who is wise? I love it. Because you remember, James was speaking to a people, okay? And there are people among the audience whom he was speaking to that were, educators, right? That's why, if you remember, he slammed in a way about rich people versus poor people. He talked about suppose a rich man comes into your audience, they'll show favoritism, because they had that problem. See, they had that problem of favoritism. So his audience were those who were the haves and those who were the have-nots, right? Really, in God's eyes, the haves and the have-nots, because he honors really those who have not more than those who have, they depend upon him. But he says here to them, who among you is in your understanding, right, is wise? He says, okay, then show it by your good life. Okay? Show it by the fruit of what you're doing. That faith without works is dead. So let me see what you're doing with this thing, right? So show it by your good life. Listen, by deeds done how? How? In humility. Don't miss that. It's not, I don't have to be seen. I'm not pouting because nobody gave me a trophy, right? I'm upset. I did all this work and nobody recognized me. That's how we get sometimes. No, humility it's not about being seen. Okay? That comes from what? Wisdom. Verse 13. So the good deeds, right, done in humility, that comes from wisdom. Verse 14. However, but I love God's word. I know I say this a lot, but I do. Because God, the word, it sets up oh yeah, I like that, right? But he doesn't leave us there because he wants to make sure we're instructed, wants to teach us, right? But he wants to make sure we understand, okay, I got you, but don't forget. Or sometimes it's a bad situation, however, so whenever you see but, remember he's giving you the full story, okay? The Lord is giving us the full story whenever we see the but. So again, but if you harbor, don't miss that word. See, I love words. Right? The imagery that James was giving to his people, the people he was reading to, when they heard the word harbor, they could see what we don't often get to see. Some of us may go down to the beach and see, these luxury sailboats and stuff in a harbor. But what he was talking about, he was merchant ships. because that was their transit of all goods. Okay? That was how everything came in and everything left. Commerce, the core of commerce for them was through the ships. So when they saw this word harbor, they saw the ships, right? And so he's saying here that in your heart, what are you holding on to? If you harbor, which means you're bringing something or taking something away, if you harbor bitter envy or selfish ambition in your heart, in other words, you see, did you know that when we have bitterness and selfish envy, that we don't hold on to that for ourselves? Anybody who's bitter wants other people to know they're bitter. You don't find many people that are angry that don't want other folks to know they're angry. Okay? They're going to make sure you know it. Okay? He's saying here, that is not of God. Listen, do not boast or deny the truth. In other words, he's saying here, if I am harboring bitter envy, it's not just envy, bitter envy. That means you've been holding on to that thing for a while. Okay? It's rotten. Did you know this? Did you know that things that are good for us, if we don't do something with it over time, it can go bad? Okay? We've all had science experiments in our refrigerators, okay? Right? Where there was this meal that was very good, and it was so good that we're going to hold on to it for later, okay? And we may not all be, right, those kind of folks that don't waste anything, okay? I've learned, my son, boy, he's not going to waste anything. If there's leftovers, he is so good about going back and making sure that he makes those leftovers the next day, okay? But you know what some of us do? Some of us, we have good intention, right? Oh, this was so good tonight. Let's save it for tomorrow. And then tomorrow we kind of go off on this other tangent and we leave it there. And all of a sudden, maybe this has never happened to you, but you go like, whoa, what's that? What's that smell? What's that? Oh my gosh, it was what we held on to from a week or so ago that now you open up and it goes, oh man, I can't, right? If you hold on to something too long and don't deal with it, it can make you sick or others sick. And what he's saying is we need to deal with bitterness and envy and selfish ambition. Because it takes that which could be of value and a blessing and now makes it something that is no value and not a blessing. James said it this way in James 1:22. He says, don't just listen to the word. Remember that? Do what it says. Okay? That we talked about a few minutes ago, showing your wisdom by your good deeds. He's saying here, don't just talk it, do what it says. James 1:19-20 told us this. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be, what? Quick to listen, okay? Slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Why? Because of that bitter root, that human anger, that's what it's called. That's worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom leads to human anger, leads to what we've seen in the media this past week, okay? Destruction, okay? So human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. We can have good intentions, and if we go about it the wrong way, those intentions are now gone. Because human anger, worldly wisdom, does not. It may make you feel good for a moment. It may make you feel like you've been heard. It may make you feel like you've made your point. But it does not bring forth the righteousness that God desires. Verse 15, he says it this way. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but it's earthly. Now James is getting kind of heavy hitting here. It's earthly, okay, unspiritual, okay, I can deal with that, and demonic. I think about where Paul said to the Ephesians church in Ephesians 6, verse 10. The battle we fight is not against flesh and blood. Okay? We need to remember that. Because whenever we come in contact with, let's be real here, or we are the instigator of, okay, this whole mindset of bitter envy, selfish ambition, okay, wanting to be seen, right, wanting to be heard at all costs, wanting to, that human anger, that bitterness that where it's not of God, okay, that does not bring forth the righteousness of God. We need to understand, but if it's not bringing forth the righteousness of God, it's bringing forth a different agenda that's not very nice. Okay, and James just calls it like it is, and he says it's demonic influence. Paul said in Ephesians 6, it's not against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities and powers in high places, okay, in the heavenly realms. It's a spiritual battle. I think about that dimensional thinking like we've talked about before, okay, where some of us just see things in one dimension, right? We just see it one. We don't step back and look at it the way God sees things, okay? The multi-dimensions of the way we should see things. There's always something else. There's always a different motive or influence behind whatever activities we see. So here we see that there can be demonic influence in our behaviors, and we need that, beloved. It's why we need to take it so serious, right? We don't. Oh, that's just me. Oh, that's just how I am. But be careful there, okay? Because we're playing into an agenda that, if I were to ask us, do we want to be part of an agenda that's not of God? I would hope there's not a soul here, right, or listening that would say, I don't want to be part of that. Well, you need to be sensitive to when we allow ourselves to do what we know we ought not do, or do what we do and then know after we've done it, it wasn't the thing we should do. We need to step back, right? We need to step back, and we need to take that very seriously as disciples of Christ. And that's what he was saying here to them about don't envy that or deny the truth to deal with it. He talked about in verse 13. Okay, so such wisdom, verse is hard here. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Whew. Let that rest on us for a minute. Okay, verse 16. Whew. For where you find, okay, where you have envy and selfish ambition. Okay, listen. This is, maybe it's just me, okay? I have to go back and watch this myself. I'm going to go back and encourage myself with this, right? So, okay? I'm not going to go back and see this, right? I'm going to talk to me here, okay, on this, because this is so rich. Listen what he says here for verse 16. Where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. So, when we see chaos and disorder, okay, and backbiting and backstabbing and all these kind of things, right? And we see all this dysfunction, and I'm going to be real, in our homes, in our workplace, wherever we are, where there are people, the root cause of it comes in different flavors. We find here is at the root cause, you're going to find there's envy issues or selfish ambition. You're going to find the me, mine, self, and I mentality. That's the root. Now, yes, it could be, philosophically or, psychologically, we can put all kind of fancy words around it and fancy perspectives on it, which is all true, right? There are great thinkers out there. There are PhDs that work in this area of trying to understand and help people with dysfunction and also, yes, there is a academic to it that's very legitimate. But at the end of the day, we can spend money, okay? We can go see professionals. We can get counseling, and you should. If you have these issues, we might need to see professionals. I'm not saying don't. But what they're going to do is reveal to us the path to the underlying cause that's going to come down to envy and selfish ambition or greed. That's what we see happening right now. What we see happening in our society right now. It's about selfish ambition. Okay? It's about, right? It's about, I want it. This is it. Okay? I want it. At all cost. It doesn't matter. And that's what he's saying. I'm sorry, I'm excited, but I'm excited because it's just so, for me, it's a blessing, right, to see how timeless the word is and how relevant. It excites any minister. Okay, you say, man, chill out, dude. But any steward, okay, that conveys the word, I'm sorry, they get excited when they see it living. Like the writer of Hebrews said that the word of God is living and active, you know, dividing the soul and the marrow, that everything is nothing is hidden from God, right? It's all there, so we all have to give an account, Hebrews 4 says. And we see that right now in the time we're living, what selfish ambition presents. There you will find disorder and every evil practice. But now he's going to talk about, okay, so we look at the times we live in. We see in the contemporary setting we're in, we see disorder. You'll be blind if you don't see it. We see evil practice, right? We see everybody playing the blame game. It was this social group doing it. No, it was this group. It was this agenda. No, it was that agenda. It was this group. You know, we see that, right? If you listen, you know, oh, everybody's pointing one another, and oh, it wasn't me, it was you, and all that blame game going on. What the word here, James is saying is, while everybody's doing this blame game and going on and carrying on, what must we do? What must the believer do? How should the believer react? And that's where he gets into the precious jewels that we find in verse 17. I'm excited. I got to breathe a minute. Verse 17. But the wisdom that comes from heaven. I'm gonna let that just kind of marinate there for a minute. See, I'm in this COVID thing. I'm a wannabe chef, right? My wife is teaching me how to cook and do all these things. So I got these new fancy cook words I'm gonna be using, right? So I'm gonna let this kind of marinate there. Let's let it simmer for a minute, okay? This wisdom that comes from heaven thing. Let's let it just sit there for a moment. Just kind of simmer and get the aroma of wisdom come from heaven, because this conjunction of this transition is the right word in verse 17 is a result of what we've already seen, verses 13 through verses 16. Now he says, now let me transition you. It's almost like saying, but you, however. Okay? So verses 13 through verses 16, he gave us all this. He set the stage. He said, it's almost as though you would think that when the Holy Spirit was writing this through James, that it was almost like he was living in January of 2021. And after he's watched all this on the social media, he turns it off. And then he looks at you and I and says, but you, however. The wisdom that comes from heaven. First of all, is to be pure. Okay? It means it's authentic. It means it has integrity. For them to see this word pure, it was the same as they could see the blacksmith and they could see the metallurgists. You know, we have material science people that do this nowadays, but they could see the gold that was being made purified, the silver that was being made purified, and how it was boiled so that the dross could raise to the top to be skimmed off to get the best metal. That's what he was saying here. And they had imagery of a sword that would not break, or gold that was untarnished, of best value. That's this word pure he's using here. He's saying metal that matters, gold that is pure, All the dross, all the mess has been skimmed off. And now the very best is being presented of great worth. That's this word. And that's how he wants to see you and I. All the dross, all the mess is skimmed off. And the best is presented. First of all, it's pure. Then listen, it loves peace at all cost. That's the word peace loving. It loves peace. Do we love peace? Remember we talked about the questions we need to ask ourselves early of the 4 questions. Are we a peacemaker or a troublemaker? Do we love peace or do we love to stir things up? So peacemakers, that we're considerate. We think about the well-being of others over ourselves. We're submissive. It doesn't mean we're weak. It doesn't mean that we don't have a voice, but we don't have to have our way. There's a big difference there. A couple that is strong together is one that we're both, right? Both the bride and the groom have a voice. One doesn't dominate the other, but neither has to always have their way. That's what he's speaking about here when he uses submissiveness. It is where we don't have to win at all cost. Full of mercy and good fruit. Impartial and sincere. No ulterior motives. The greatest blessing you can give someone is to call them or talk to them, let them know you care about them, and then don't follow it up with something you want from them. I'm going to tell you that. The best blessing that you can give someone is to reach out to them in whatever way. Let them know you care about them, and then not close it with something that you want from them. Okay? That's what he's speaking about here on the sincerity thing. Don't build it up just because you're trying to get something out of it, because that's selfish ambition. But if you have a need, it doesn't mean don't ask, just say. Right? You don't have to prop them up, just say, I'm in trouble. Just come out the gate. I'm calling you because I've got an issue I'm dealing with, and I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. So I'm not saying, because we are to be each other, right? We're supposed to bear each other's burdens. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is don't cue it up, okay? Right? Just let your request be known. Or the greatest gift you can give someone is to genuinely let them know you care and leave it there. So it goes on, verse 18. Peacemakers who sow. Don't miss that word. Because the imagery of sowing they had, which we don't get, some of us may, but what they saw there was the farmer. They saw toiling the soil. They saw working in very arid communities. And they saw where they had drought because, see, in the Middle East, quite frankly, and in Jerusalem and Palestine and those places, look up, Google those places today. Google Jerusalem, Google Palestine, Google Israel, Google, and look at the terrain, look at the area. Okay, look at the agricultural conditions there. That's who he was speaking to. They didn't have the fertile abundance that we may have in some of the areas where we live, where there's lush soil, and they were working in some very difficult climatic situations. So when they saw this sowing, they knew that sowing was work. And that's why Paul said, right, that one sows, another waters, but that God has to make it grow. So what he's saying here is that when you sow, when I sow, when we sow, okay, as he's saying here, as a peacemaker, what we're doing is we're doing the work, but we're leaving the results to God. See, sometimes we give up. I know we need to go, but sometimes we give up. Somebody needs to hear this. Maybe. Sometimes we give up because we're working hard and we don't see any results. And in the natural, we think that because we don't see results that nothing's happening. That's not true. That's not true. Because all things God works together for the good, as we've talked about in Romans 8 and 28 today. There's all God's doing something. Just because we don't see does not mean that he's not working. That's why it's called faith, as we talked about in Hebrews 11:1, where we trust God that although we don't see, we work and trust him for the results. So this peacemaking, as he says here, who sow in peace, listen, reap. Reap's a big word, okay? Reap is big. Okay? Reap is bounty. Okay? Reap is abundance. Okay? So he's not saying you're going to get a little bit. Did you know that when God does something, that he does it in a way that's going to blow your mind? Did you know that when God does something, it's more that's why you can't help yourself but to let people know when God, not when you know God has done something, if you live a little while and you get a chance to see God work and do something that blows your mind, you can't help but tell somebody that's reaping. Okay, that's bounty here. So he's saying reap, when he says here, when you reap a harvest, don't miss this, will reap a harvest of righteousness. I close with this. We talked about this fruit. Verse 17 talked about good fruit. I wrote this down for us. Galatians 5, 22 through 23 as we go. What's this fruit? Listen to me. Fruit is synonymous, means the same thing as characteristics or behavior. Okay? So when you hear fruit, bearing fruit, he's talking about how we conduct ourselves. He's talking about our behavior. He's talking about when other people see you, what they think about you. That's what fruit is. Okay, so let's look at this fruit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's Galatians 5, 22 through 23. Listen to this. Against such things, it says here, there's no law. What it means by that is, when those are the attributes of our life, you will not be overcome. I leave us with this, Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the children of God. I pray that as we go into this new week, and really life, it's not just like this needs to be the pedigree, the culmination of who we are. It should be in our spiritual DNA. That we will continue to grow into being those who demonstrate godly wisdom versus worldly wisdom in our contemporary time. Well, oh my gosh, do people ever need to see it more and more than ever before? And when asked for how we're doing it, or asked for how we're responding in a different way, because did you know when people see fruit, it will draw them? It's like a fruit tree, that if you see if you see two trees, you see one bearing lush fruit, you're going to be drawn to that tree and what it bears. Okay, people will be drawn to you versus repelled. They will want to know where you're coming from. Be very careful to make sure you give God all the honor and all the glory and all the praise, because that's our chance to give good news that brings great joy to all people. Christ.